Blood drained from Naya's face as she spotted her ex stalking through the village market with murder in his eyes, forcing her desperate lunge into the arms of a hooded stranger whose royal medallion slipped from his cloak. The protective embrace that saved her from immediate danger had unknowingly awakened an ancient Apache prophecy, binding the marked healer to an exiled king whose throne lay an ocean away. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The mist clung to the mountains of northern Montana like a veil of secrets, wrapping the small village of Pinewood in a ghostly embrace. The evening market buzzed with activity despite the chill in the air, lanterns casting pools of amber light across wooden stalls laden with crafts, herbs, and local produce. The scent of pine and wood smoke mingled with the earthy aroma of healing herbs. Naya Whitefeather moved between the stalls with practiced caution, her dark eyes scanning the crowd as she collected dried sage and yarrow for her remedies. The traditional markings etched along her right cheekbone, 3 parallel lines that curved like a hawk's wing, seemed to catch the lamplight, a permanent reminder of the heritage she carried with both pride and burden. Her long black hair was bound in a simple braid, and her worn leather jacket hugged her slender frame, offering little protection against the mountain cold. For 6 months, this remote village had been her sanctuary, a place where she could almost forget the life she'd fled. At 23, Naya had already survived more than most. The loss of her parents, the suffocating grip of a man who claimed to love her, and the painful severing of ties with her Apache community. Here in Pinewood, she'd established a fragile peace, using her knowledge of traditional medicine to earn a modest living while keeping to herself. "Evening, Miss Naya," called Mrs. Bennett from her produce stall. "Got those blackberries you asked for? Good for fever, you said?" Naya nodded with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Crush them with mint and honey. Works wonders for the children's summer fevers." She exchanged a few coins for the berries, carefully tucking them into her worn canvas bag. The village had come to respect her quiet ways and healing talents, asking few questions about her past. That was how she needed it to be. Safety lived in anonymity. Then she felt it, a prickling awareness that traveled up her spine like ice water. Something had shifted in the market's energy, a discord in the harmony of the evening bustle. Naya's fingers tightened around her bag as she slowly turned, her heartbeat accelerating to a frantic rhythm. And there he was. Marcos Redhawk stood at the edge of the market, his muscular frame tensed like a predator's. Even from this distance, she could see the familiar rage in his eyes, dark, possessive, unforgiving. The hunting knife strapped to his belt glinted in the lamplight as his hand moved to its handle with practiced ease. 6 months of hiding, and still he had found her. Panic surged through Naya's veins, her mind racing through impossible escapes. The village was nestled in a valley with only one road out. Her cabin was too far. Marcos would catch her before she reached the tree line. That's when she saw him, a tall stranger in a hooded cloak standing near the blacksmith's stall. Something about his posture, the way he held himself apart from the crowd, yet observed everything, caught her attention. A stranger meant no connections to her past, no loyalty to Marcos. Without allowing herself to reconsider, Naya moved swiftly through the crowd toward the hooded man. She could feel Marcos's gaze burning into her back, hear his heavy footsteps beginning to follow. 3 more stalls to pass. 2, 1. The stranger turned slightly as she approached, his face partially hidden in shadow beneath the hood. All Naya could make out was a strong jaw, dusted with dark stubble, and eyes that seemed to assess her with unexpected intelligence. "Please," she whispered urgently, stepping directly into his space. "Pretend you know me. My ex is here. He'll kill me if he finds me alone." Without hesitation, the man's arms came around her, pulling her against his chest with surprising gentleness, yet unmistakable authority. The scent of sandalwood and leather enveloped her as his cloak partially wrapped around them both. "Breathe," he murmured, his voice low and accented in a way she couldn't place. "Look natural." Naya forced herself to relax against him, though every muscle in her body remained coiled for flight. She could feel the steady, calm beat of his heart against her cheek, so unlike her own racing pulse. Through the gap in his cloak, she glimpsed Marcos approaching, his face contorted with the familiar rage that had left bruises on her skin too many times before. As he drew nearer, the stranger subtly shifted, angling his body to shield her more completely. The movement caused something to slip from beneath the stranger's collar, a medallion that caught the lamplight and gleamed with unmistakable significance. Intricate engravings surrounded a crest Naya didn't recognize, a crown intertwined with a sword and wolf. The medallion's appearance seemed to transform the atmosphere. Several passers-by stopped, their eyes widening in recognition. A whisper rippled through the crowd, too faint for Naya to catch. But she felt the stranger tense, his arm tightening around her waist as he tucked the medallion back beneath his shirt with his free hand. Marcos had stopped several feet away, his predatory gaze now clouded with confusion and wariness as he observed the man holding Naya. Something in the stranger's bearing had given him pause, and in that moment, Naya sensed that she had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple escape. The medallion, the whispers, the sudden deference of the crowd. This was no ordinary stranger. She had just embraced a man with secrets possibly deeper than her own. Time seemed suspended in the misty evening air. Naya felt the stranger's breath warm against her hair as Marcos stood frozen several paces away, his fist clenched around the hunting knife. The market's chatter had dimmed to a whisper, eyes darting between the three figures caught in this silent confrontation. "Is there a problem here?" The stranger's voice carried unexpected authority. Deep, measured, with the faint accent that reminded Naya of old European films. Despite its softness, the question held the unmistakable weight of command. Marcos shifted his weight, his expression darkening with recognition. "Naya belongs with her people, with me." His words were directed at the stranger, but his eyes never left Naya's face. "This doesn't concern you." "I believe it does." The stranger's arm remained firm around Naya's waist, protective rather than possessive. "The lady seems to disagree with your assessment." A crowd had begun to gather, forming a loose circle around them. Among them, Naya noticed Sheriff Holloway, his hand casually resting on his holstered weapon. The presence of law enforcement should have been reassuring, but Naya knew too well how little protection the law had offered her before. Marcos took a half step forward, then faltered as the stranger straightened to his full height. The hood of his cloak fell back slightly, revealing more of his face, strong features framed by dark hair, touched with silver at the temples, eyes the color of a winter sky, clear and penetrating. "You don't know who she is," Marcos persisted, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "What she's done." The stranger tilted his head slightly. "And you don't know who I am," he replied, the hint of a grim smile touching his lips. "Perhaps we should keep it that way." Something in his tone, a subtle note of warning, made Marcos hesitate. His gaze flicked to the partially visible medallion, then to the gathering crowd, and finally back to Naya. The calculation in his eyes made her stomach clench. "This isn't over," he said at last, directing his words to Naya alone. "Blood calls to blood. You can't hide forever." Then he was gone, pushing through the crowd with aggressive strides, disappearing into the fog that encircled the market's edge. Naya released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. The stranger's arm tightened briefly in support, then loosened as he took a half step back, creating a respectful distance between them. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice now gentler, private. Before she could answer, Sheriff Holloway approached, his weathered face set in an expression of disbelief and awkward deference. "Your Marge," he began, then caught himself at the stranger's sharp glance. "Sir, is everything in order here?" The stranger nodded curtly. "Everything is fine, Sheriff, though I'd appreciate your discretion." Of course," Holloway stammered, tipping his hat. "Miss Whitefeather," he added with a nod to Naya, then retreated to disperse the curious onlookers. Naya felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted. She stared at the stranger, the man the sheriff had almost addressed with a title, the medallion, the accent, the natural command in his voice. "Who are you?" she whispered. His eyes met hers, and Naya saw in them a complex blend of resignation and resolve. "Someone who understands what it means to run," he answered quietly. "My name is Alaric, just Alaric. No last name, no explanation for the medallion or the sheriff's deference." The partial answer hung between them, both an offering and a boundary. "Thank you for your help," Naya said, gathering her composure. "I should go." Alaric studied her face, his gaze lingering on the traditional markings on her cheek. "That man, he will return." It wasn't a question. The certainty in his voice matched the dread in Naya's heart. "Yes," she admitted, "he always does." A moment of silence passed between them, filled with the murmurs of the dispersing crowd and the distant howl of wind through the mountain pines. The fog had thickened, shrouding the outer stalls in ghostly white. "Allow me to escort you home," Alaric said finally. "For safety." Naya hesitated. Experience had taught her to trust no one, especially men who appeared unexpectedly in her life. Yet something about this stranger, Alaric, felt different. Not safe, precisely, but honorable. "I live on the outskirts," she said, the words an acceptance despite her reservations. "By the old miller's stream." He nodded, pulling his hood back into place. As they began to walk, two men emerged from the shadows to fall into step several paces behind them. Bodyguards, Naya realized, their vigilant posture unmistakable despite their casual clothing. Alaric caught her questioning glance. "Companions," he said simply. "Are you in danger too?" Naya asked, the pieces refusing to form a coherent picture. A smile ghosted across his features, gone almost before it appeared. "Always," he replied, "though not from men like your Marcos." "He's not mine," she corrected sharply, then added more softly, "Not anymore." Alaric nodded in acknowledgement as they left the market behind, the fog swallowing them into its misty embrace. Behind them, whispers continued to ripple through Pinewood. Tales of a king walking among them, and the Apache woman he had defended with a simple gesture of protection. The path to Naya's cabin wound through silver-barked aspen trees, their leaves whispering secrets in the evening breeze. Overhead, stars began to pierce the darkening sky as the fog thinned among the higher reaches of the forest. The night air carried the scent of pine and wild sage, familiar comforts that usually eased Naya's spirit, but now failed to calm her racing thoughts. Alaric walked beside her with measured steps, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. His companions maintained their distance, shadows among shadows, their vigilance evident in the way they scanned the surrounding woods. The silence between Naya and Alaric stretched, not uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken questions. "Your markings," Alaric said finally, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "They're Apache, aren't they?" Naya's hand instinctively rose to her cheek, fingertips tracing the three curved lines. "Yes. I received them when I turned 16. They represent the eagle's flight, a connection to the ancestors and the sky spirits." She hesitated, then added, "Few outside my tribe recognize them. I've traveled widely," he replied, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. "One learns to recognize the sacred when one sees it." Something in his tone, a reverence perhaps or understanding, made her glance at him. The moonlight caught the angles of his face, illuminating features that seemed carved from stone, yet warmed by the humanity in his eyes. "And your medallion?" she asked, emboldened by his recognition of her culture. "What does it represent?" Alaric's pace slowed slightly. His hand moved to his chest where the medallion lay hidden beneath his clothing. "A burden," he said simply, "and a promise." Before she could press further, they rounded a bend in the path, and her cabin came into view. It was a humble structure, built of weathered logs and river stone, with a small porch and windows that glowed with the soft light of the lamps she'd left burning. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the stone chimney, evidence of the banked fire within. "This is home," Naya said, the word feeling strange on her tongue. Home had once meant the reservation, the embrace of mountains older than human memory, the rhythm of ceremonial drums. This place was shelter, but she wasn't sure it would ever truly be home. Alaric surveyed the cabin and its surroundings with a critical eye. "It's isolated," he observed, "defensible but vulnerable for someone alone." "I'm used to being alone," she replied, the words emerging more sharply than she'd intended. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw not pity, but recognition. "As am I," he said quietly. One of the companions approached then, his movements nearly silent despite his size. He leaned in to whisper something to Alaric, who nodded gravely. "James will check the perimeter," Alaric informed her. "A precaution. Your Marcos has left the village but may not have gone far." "He's not," Naya began, then sighed. "Thank you." As they reached the porch steps, the door of her cabin suddenly swung open. Naya tensed, but it was only Mrs. Littlefeather, an elderly woman from a neighboring tribe who sometimes helped Naya with her healing work. "Child, there you are. I was worried when—" Mrs. Littlefeather stopped short, her rheumy eyes widening as they fell on Alaric. She immediately lowered her gaze and inclined her head. "Forgive me, I didn't realize you had distinguished company." Naya frowned, confused by the old woman's deference. "Mrs. Littlefeather, this is Alaric. He's a visitor to Pinewood." Mrs. Littlefeather's eyes darted up briefly, then down again. "Of course, child. Just a visitor." She stepped back into the cabin, gesturing for them to enter. "I made tea. The night is cold." Inside, the cabin was warm and fragrant with herbs hanging from the rafters to dry. A small fire crackled in the stone hearth, and simple furniture, a table, chairs, shelves lined with jars of remedies, filled the main room. It was modest, but meticulously kept, evidence of Naya's careful attention. Mrs. Littlefeather busied herself pouring tea into clay mugs, her gnarled hands trembling slightly. "I heard about the market," she said, her back to them. "That Marcos boy never did know when to leave well enough alone." Naya tensed. "How did you hear already?" The old woman turned, handing a mug to each of them. "News travels faster than feet, child, especially news like this." Her meaningful glance toward Alaric did not go unnoticed. Alaric accepted the tea with a nod of thanks, his eyes taking in the details of Naya's home. His gaze lingered on a small shelf where she kept personal items, a woven bracelet, a carved wooden eagle, and a faded photograph of a younger Naya standing between two smiling adults, her parents. "Your family?" he asked, nodding toward the photo. Naya's throat tightened. "Yes, they died 3 winters ago. Influenza swept through the reservation." "I'm sorry," he said, and the simple words carried the weight of someone who understood loss intimately. It was after they passed that Marcos changed, she found herself saying, unsure why she was sharing this with a stranger. We'd been childhood friends, then sweethearts. He was kind once, or I thought he was. But grief can twist a person. Or reveal what was already there, hidden beneath the surface, Alaric replied, his voice gentle but unflinching. Mrs. Littlefeather cleared her throat. That boy always had darkness in him. The elders saw it. Your father saw it too, toward the end. Naya looked up sharply. Looked. My father never said anything against Marcos. He wouldn't, not to you. He knew how you felt. The old woman sighed. But he worried. The jealousy, the way Marcos tried to control who you spoke to, where you went. These are not the ways of a man who truly honors a woman. Alaric remained silent, but Naya felt his attentive gaze. She stared into her tea, memories surfacing like stones in a river. Marcos's grip tightening on her arm when she spoke too long with another man. The gradual isolation as he convinced her that others didn't respect their relationship. The first time his anger left a bruise on her skin, followed by desperate apologies and promises it would never happen again. When did you decide to leave? Alaric asked, breaking into her thoughts. Naya's hand unconsciously moved to her side, where a scar lay hidden beneath her clothing. When I realized the next time might be the last time, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. A shadow passed over Alaric's face, something cold and dangerous that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He set down his mug carefully. He will not harm you again, he said, each word precise and weighted with certainty. It wasn't just a reassurance, it sounded like a decree. Mrs. Littlefeather nodded, as if his words had settled something important. She moved to the door. I should return home. My grandsons will worry. She paused, looking directly at Alaric. We have waited a long time for your return. Just Alaric, please, he interrupted gently. For now. The old woman smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. As you wish, but know that your father's people have not forgotten. With that cryptic statement, she slipped out into the night, leaving Naya staring after her in bewilderment. The door closed behind Mrs. Littlefeather with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Naya stood frozen, her tea cooling in her hands, mind racing to make sense of the old woman's cryptic words. She turned to Alaric, who had moved to stand by the window, his profile sharp against the darkness beyond the glass. Your father's people? She repeated. What did she mean by that? Alaric's shoulders tensed beneath his cloak. For a long moment he said nothing, his eyes scanning the night beyond her cabin. When he finally turned to face her, his expression had changed, no longer simply guarded but resolute, as if he'd come to a decision. My father was born here, he said quietly. In this region. He left as a young man, but his family has roots that go back generations in these mountains. It was truth, Naya sensed, but not the complete truth. Before she could press further, one of Alaric's men, the one called James, appeared at the doorway with a sharp knock. Sir, we've secured the perimeter, he reported, his voice professional but tense. No sign of the man from the market, but there are fresh tracks heading east. He's not gone far. Alaric nodded. Double the watch tonight, and contact Mitchell. Tell him to bring the rest of the team up from the valley. Yes, sir. James hesitated, then added, the locals are talking. Word is spreading faster than we anticipated. It was bound to happen, Alaric replied, seeming resigned rather than concerned. We'll adjust accordingly. After James departed, Alaric turned back to Naya. I apologize for the intrusion into your life. It seems my presence has complicated your situation. Naya set her mug down and crossed her arms. Who are you? Really? She demanded. Mrs. Littlefeather nearly called you something else. The sheriff too, and these men who guard you. She gestured toward the door. You're not just a traveler passing through Pinewood. Alaric held her gaze steadily. No, he admitted. I'm not. He reached beneath his collar and withdrew the medallion, holding it in his palm where the firelight caught its intricate engravings. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, a crown intertwined with a sword and wolf, surrounded by words in a language Naya didn't recognize. I am Alaric Westerlund, he said, his voice taking on a formal quality that seemed to transform him before her eyes. Son of King Edward IV and Queen Eleonora of Westerlund. Naya stared at him, confusion giving way to disbelief. Westerlund, the European kingdom. A small one, yes, but with historic ties to this region. My father's grandfather emigrated from here to Westerlund during the Gold Rush era. He married into the royal family, eventually becoming king through a complex series of successions. Naya shook her head, trying to process this information. And you're, what, a prince? Something like pain flickered across Alaric's face. I was crowned prince. Now I am king. He said the title as if it were a burden rather than a privilege. My parents died 2 years ago in what was officially called an accident. It wasn't. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Naya uncrossed her arms, her defensive posture softening. You were exiled, she realized. That's why you understand what it means to run. Alaric inclined his head in acknowledgement. A coup orchestrated by my uncle and several council members. They've ruled as a regency council since then, claiming I abandoned my duties. His jaw tightened. But loyalty to my father's lineage remains strong among many of our people, including those with ancestral connections to this region. Naya moved to the hearth, adding another small log to the fire. The familiar action helped ground her as she absorbed this unexpected revelation. So you've come back to reclaim your throne? To decide if I should, he corrected. I've spent 2 years gathering evidence, building alliances, preparing for what must be done. But before I make my final decision, I needed to understand the land my father loved so much, the place where his family's story began. A connection was forming in Naya's mind. The tribal elders sometimes speak of a family that left generations ago. European settlers who lived alongside our people, learned our ways, respected our traditions. They called them the wolves who walk with eagles. Alaric's eyes widened slightly. The wolf is my family's symbol, he confirmed, and the eagle is sacred to my people, Naya finished. She touched the markings on her cheek. So our histories are connected somehow. It would seem so. Alaric returned the medallion to its place beneath his shirt. Though I didn't expect to find those connections so immediately. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition of parallel journeys, of lives uprooted, of identities both hidden and revealed. A sharp crack from outside broke the moment. Alaric moved to the window in one fluid motion, his hand going to his side, where Naya now noticed the outline of a concealed weapon beneath his cloak. James appeared at the door again, his expression grim. Just a branch breaking under the snow weight, sir, he reported. But we should discuss arrangements for the night, Alaric nodded. I'll join you momentarily. When they were alone again, Naya found her voice. Why tell me all this? You've clearly been keeping your identity secret. Because you trusted me with your truth, he answered simply, and because I believe our meeting wasn't coincidence. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. The legends of my family speak of signs, guides who appear at crucial moments to show the way forward. A wounded healer with the mark of an eagle seems significant. Naya wasn't sure how to respond to that. The idea that she might be some prophesied guide in this man's journey felt both absurd and strangely fitting, given how her life had veered from its expected path. I'm just a woman trying to survive, she said finally. "As am I a man doing the same," he replied with unexpected humility, despite the titles and expectations. He moved toward the door, then paused. "My men will guard your cabin tonight. You'll be safe from Marcos." "And from those who might wish you harm?" Naya asked, the reality of his situation sinking in. "If you're truly a king in exile, your enemies won't be far behind." A grim smile touched his lips. "My enemies believe me to be in Geneva. By the time they discover otherwise, I intend to have completed what I came here to do, which is to remember who I am beneath the crown." He held her gaze steadily. "As you perhaps are trying to discover who you are beyond your past." With that, he inclined his head in a gesture that somehow managed to be both formal and personal, then stepped outside to confer with his men, leaving Naya standing by the fire with the distinct feeling that her quiet exile in Pinewood had just become infinitely more complicated. Through the window, she watched Alaric speaking with his guards, his bearing regal despite his simple clothing. In the firelight, she could see what she had missed before, the subtle marks of nobility in his posture, the natural authority in his gestures, the weight of responsibility in his eyes. A king. She had embraced a king. And somewhere in the darkness beyond her cabin, Marcos waited, his rage simmering, his determination to reclaim what he considered his undiminished by the day's setback. Naya touched the healing pouch at her belt, fingers running over the familiar contours of the sacred objects within. Tonight, she would need to prepare stronger medicine, not just for physical protection, but for the clarity of mind and spirit that would be required in the days ahead. For the first time since fleeing the reservation, she felt the need to reconnect with the deepest practices of her tradition, to seek guidance from the ancestors whose wisdom flowed in her blood. She would need all their strength to navigate the convergence of past and present that now swirled around her like the mist among the aspens. Dawn broke over Pinewood with fingers of pale gold reaching through the aspens. Naya knelt by the small stream behind her cabin, her breath forming clouds in the crisp morning air. The night had passed without incident, at least none that had reached her awareness, but sleep had eluded her, chased away by thoughts of kings and prophecies, of past wounds and present dangers. In her hands, she held a small clay bowl filled with water from the stream, its surface reflecting the shifting colors of the sunrise. Naya whispered prayers in her native tongue, words passed down through generations, asking for clarity and protection. When the last syllable left her lips, she dipped her fingertips into the water and touched them to her forehead, heart, and the markings on her cheek. A sacred ritual? Alaric's voice came from behind her, quiet and respectful. Naya wasn't startled. Some part of her had sensed his presence moments before he spoke. "Yes," she answered, rising to her feet. "A way to greet the day with intention, to honor the spirits of water and light." She turned to face him, noting that he looked as though he'd rested no better than she had. His cloak was gone, revealing broad shoulders beneath a simple dark sweater. In the daylight, without the shadows of hood or firelight, he seemed both more human and more regal. "My grandmother practiced something similar," he said, surprising her. "She was from this region originally. She maintained the old ways, even in Westerlund's royal palace." Naya tilted her head, studying him. "You have indigenous blood." It wasn't a question, but Alaric nodded. "My father's grandmother was from the Northern Cheyenne tribe. She married my great-grandfather during his time here, returned with him to Westerlund. The royal historians tend to minimize this aspect of our lineage." "But you don't," Naya observed. "No." His eyes met hers steadily. "It's partly why I've come back, to reclaim all of who I am, not just the European bloodline." The morning light caught in his eyes, revealing flecks of amber in the blue, like earth mixed with sky. Naya felt something shift between them, a recognition deeper than words, a connection that defied their vastly different lives. The moment broke as James appeared at the edge of the trees. "Sir, we've found something you should see." They followed him through the woods to a small clearing about 100 yards from Naya's cabin. There, carved freshly into the trunk of an old pine, was a symbol Naya recognized immediately. A diamond with a slash through it, the mark Marcos used as his signature. Beneath it lay a dead eagle, its magnificent wings spread in a grotesque parody of flight, throat cut in a deliberate, ritual manner. Naya's hand flew to her mouth, a wave of nausea rolling through her. "This is a desecration," she whispered. "Eagles are sacred to my people. To kill one is—" She couldn't finish. Alaric's face had hardened to granite. "When was this done?" he asked James. "Sometime before dawn. The blood is still relatively fresh." James glanced at Naya with sympathy. There were 2 sets of tracks leading away, heading toward the reservation lands. "He's not alone anymore," Naya said, dread settling in her stomach like lead. "Marcos has reached out to others from the tribe. Those who share his beliefs?" Alaric asked. Naya nodded grimly. "There's a faction, small but vocal, who believe that those who leave the tribe have turned their backs on the old ways. They see people like me as contaminated by the outside world." She gestured to the eagle. "This is a message. He's saying I've lost my spiritual protection, that I'm no longer under the eagle's wing." Alaric stepped closer to the tree, examining the carved symbol. "And the diamond with the slash. It means broken loyalty," she explained. "It's his personal mark, but also carries that meaning." A muscle worked in Alaric's jaw. "He means to shame you publicly, to frame your leaving as a betrayal rather than escape." "Yes." Naya knelt beside the eagle, murmuring a prayer for its spirit. "In our tradition, such accusations would normally be settled by the tribal council. But Marcos doesn't respect their authority anymore. Not when it comes to me." Alaric watched her with an expression that mingled admiration and concern. "What will you do?" Naya rose, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "I need to speak with the elders, to tell them my side before Marcos poisons them further against me." She met Alaric's gaze. "I've been hiding for 6 months, living with 1 foot in shadow. Perhaps it's time to step fully into the light." "The reservation is 3 hours' drive from here," James interjected, "and likely watched by Marcos and his allies now," Alaric added. "Going there directly would be dangerous." Naya squared her shoulders. "There's another way. A gathering place sacred to several tribes in the region. The elders will come if called properly, especially if they know." She hesitated, then nodded toward Alaric. "If they know a Westerlund has returned." Alaric raised an eyebrow. "You would use my identity." "Not use," she corrected. "Honor. The connection between your family and our tribes is part of our oral history. Your return after generations would be seen as significant, a fulfillment of certain prophecies." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Alaric's face. "I came here to understand my heritage, not to become entangled in prophecies." Naya looked at him steadily. "Perhaps understanding your heritage means accepting all that comes with it, including the stories your ancestors left behind in this land." The weight of her words seemed to settle on Alaric's shoulders. After a moment's consideration, he nodded once. "Very well. We'll call your elders. But first," he glanced at the desecrated eagle, his expression hardening, "we honor this one's spirit properly." As the morning light strengthened around them, Naya led them in a ceremony for the fallen eagle, her voice rising in songs of mourning and respect. And though Alaric didn't know the words, he stood beside her with a reverence that spoke volumes, his presence solid as the mountains themselves as they prepared to face what lay ahead. The journey to the sacred gathering place began at midday. Alaric had exchanged his conspicuous dark clothing for attire better suited to the wilderness. Sturdy boots, khaki pants, and a flannel shirt beneath a leather jacket that looked well-worn yet unmistakably expensive. Naya had packed sparingly, medicines, ceremonial items, and the photograph of her parents wrapped carefully in a soft cloth. They traveled in a rugged SUV driven by Mitchell, a quiet man with watchful eyes who had arrived with reinforcements as Alaric had ordered. James rode in the passenger seat, occasionally consulting a satellite phone. 2 additional vehicles followed at a discreet distance, carrying the rest of Alaric's security team. Naya sat beside Alaric in the back seat, the miles stretching between them and Pinewood as they wound deeper into the mountains. The landscape grew wilder, more pristine, ancient forests giving way to high meadows, then climbing again into the realm of stone and sky. "The place we're going," Naya explained, as they left the main road for a barely visible track, "is called Whispering Stones. It lies between territories, neutral ground for the tribes of this region for centuries." Alaric nodded, his gaze fixed on the rugged terrain ahead. "And you're certain the elders will come?" "I sent the message through Mrs. Littlefeather's grandsons before we left." Naya's fingers played nervously with the medicine pouch at her waist. "She is respected among many tribes. When she invokes the old alliance and mentions the return of the Westerland wolf, yes, they will come." The track narrowed further, forcing Mitchell to reduce their speed to a crawl. The forest had thickened around them, ancient pines standing sentinel on either side. Naya felt the familiar tightening in her chest that always accompanied her return to lands steeped in tradition and memory. "You're afraid," Alaric observed quietly, his voice pitched so only she could hear. Naya didn't deny it. "I left without the blessing of the elders. Some will say I abandoned my responsibilities as a healer." "And did you?" His question held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "No," she replied after a moment's reflection. "I carried my healing knowledge with me. I've used it to help the people of Pinewood. But I did break with tradition by leaving without formal release from my duties to the tribe." "Sometimes survival requires breaking with tradition," Alaric said, his gaze distant, as if speaking from personal experience. "Duty and self-preservation can stand in opposition." "You understand that conflict well," Naya surmised, "between your duty as king and your need to save yourself." A shadow passed over his face. "When my parents were killed, I had a choice: stay and likely die in another accident, or flee to gather allies and evidence. Many called my choice cowardice. And what do you call it?" "Strategy," he answered with grim certainty. "My uncle and his conspirators expected me to make a stand immediately, to play the proud doomed hero. Instead, I chose patience. 2 years of careful planning while they grew complacent in their power." His hand moved unconsciously to where his medallion lay hidden. Sometimes the true path of honor is not the obvious one. Their eyes met, and Naya felt a current of understanding pass between them. Both had made difficult choices that others might condemn, choices that had preserved their lives, but at the cost of perception and belonging. The SUV jolted over a particularly rough patch of ground, breaking the moment. James turned in his seat. "Sir, we're approaching the location. Mitchell will take us as far as the vehicle can go, but according to Ms. Whitefeather's directions, we'll need to proceed on foot for the last half-mile." Alaric nodded. "Have the men establish a perimeter, but keep their distance from the sacred site. We don't want to appear as an occupying force." 20 minutes later, they stood at the beginning of a narrow footpath that wound up through a rocky slope. Mitchell and the security team remained with the vehicles, while Alaric insisted on accompanying Naya alone for the final approach. "This is Whispering Stones," Naya said as they crested the rise. Before them spread a natural amphitheater formed by weathered granite formations that curved in a semicircle around a flat stone dais. The stones were striated with bands of quartz that caught the afternoon light, seeming to glow from within. It said that the spirits of ancestors can speak through the stones when the wind is right. Alaric surveyed the site with evident respect. It's remarkable. Naturally formed? Mostly, our ancestors enhanced what nature provided. Naya led him toward the center. For thousands of years, decisions affecting multiple tribes were made here. Treaties, alliances, marriages between clans, all consecrated on this ground. As they reached the dais, Alaric stopped suddenly, his attention caught by something carved into the largest of the standing stones. He approached it slowly, his fingers tracing the weathered outline of a familiar symbol, a wolf intertwined with what appeared to be an eagle. "This," he began, then fell silent, his expression a complex mixture of wonder and recognition. "Your family mark," Naya confirmed, coming to stand beside him. "Combined with the eagle of my people, the elders call it the Covenant Stone. It commemorates an alliance formed nearly 200 years ago, when your ancestors first came to this land." Alaric's hand lingered on the carving, his touch almost reverent. "My father spoke of an oath his grandfather took, a promise to protect the lands and people here, even after he left for Vesterlund." His voice lowered. "I always thought it was just a story." "The stones remember what people forget," Naya said softly. Then, her body tensing, she added, "And so do the elders." Alaric turned to follow her gaze. At the edge of the amphitheater stood 5 figures, 3 men and 2 women of varying ages, all with the weathered dignity of tribal leaders. Their expressions were solemn, assessing, as they looked upon the king and the healer standing together before the Covenant Stone. Silence hung in the air like suspended breath. The elders remained at the edge of the amphitheater, neither advancing nor retreating, their weathered faces impassive in the afternoon light. Naya felt the weight of their judgment even from a distance, years of tradition and expectation pressing down upon her shoulders. She took a steadying breath and stepped forward, her right palm raised in the traditional greeting of respect. "Elders of the council, I thank you for answering the call," she said in her native tongue, her voice carrying across the stone circle with unexpected strength. The oldest among them, a woman named Singing Hawk, whose silver hair was bound in a simple braid, responded with a slight nod. "We come not only for you, Naya Whitefeather," she replied in English, her eyes shifting to Alaric. "We come because of what stands beside you." Alaric straightened almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift from traveler to monarch that Naya felt rather than saw. He inclined his head in formal acknowledgement, but remained silent, seeming to understand instinctively that this moment belonged first to Naya. The elders moved forward as one, their steps measured and deliberate as they approached the central dais. Up close, Naya could see the familiar faces more clearly, not just Singing Hawk, but also Thomas Running Bear, whose grandfather had taught Naya her first healing songs, Sarah Two Rivers, who had comforted Naya after her parents' deaths, Robert Longbow, who had once been her father's closest friend, and Daniel Black Eagle, the youngest of the council, but respected for his wisdom. "6 moons have passed since you left us," Thomas Running Bear said, his deep voice resonating against the stones. "You departed without ceremony, without blessing. Many believed you dead." "Others said you had abandoned the old ways," Sarah added, her tone gentler but no less serious. "And some," Daniel Black Eagle finished, his eyes sharp as flint, "said you fled justice for bringing discord to the tribe." Naya's heart constricted, but she kept her voice steady. "I left to survive," she said simply. "Marcos Redhawk's love turned to possession, then to violence. When I sought help, his family's influence silenced many voices that might have spoken for me." "Yet you did not come to the council," Robert Longbow observed. "I tried," Naya counted, a rare flash of anger coloring her words. 3 times I sought audience. 3 times I was told the council was occupied with more important matters. A ripple of discomfort passed through the elders. It was Singing Hawk who broke the tense silence, her aged eyes sharp with memory. This is true, she acknowledged. In those days, Marcos's uncle sat among us. He made certain your petition never reached full council. She glanced at the others. We have failed in our duty to protect all our children equally. The admission hung in the air, unexpected and profound. Naya felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of resentment she hadn't fully recognized until this moment. And now you return, Thomas said, with him. He looked directly at Alaric, his expression unreadable. The wolf who walks with eagles. Alaric stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Naya. I am Alaric Westerlund, he stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that seemed as natural to him as breathing. We know who you are, Sarah responded. The question is whether you know. Alaric's brow furrowed slightly. I'm here to understand my family's connection to this land and its people. My father spoke of an oath, a covenant made by my great-grandfather. More than an oath, Daniel corrected, moving toward the covenant stone. A prophecy and a promise intertwined. His hand traced the carved symbols, wolf and eagle, with reverence. When your ancestor married into our extended family, the shamans spoke of a time when the wolf would return in a season of great change. The prophecy states that when the wolf returns to stand beside the marked healer, Singing Hawk continued, both their peoples will face a turning point, either renewal or ruin. Naya glanced at Alaric, seeing the weight of these words settle upon him. He had come seeking personal understanding, not prophetic responsibility. I did not come to fulfill prophecies, he said carefully. Few who fulfill prophecies set out to do so, Robert replied with the ghost of a smile. They simply walked the path before them with an open heart. A distant sound interrupted their exchange, the rumble of vehicles approaching. James appeared at the edge of the amphitheater, his expression urgent. Sir, he called to Alaric, we have company, multiple vehicles coming up the access road. Alaric's posture shifted instantly from diplomatic to defensive. My men. In position but outnumbered, James reported. At least 15 individuals, some armed. Marcos, Naya whispered, cold dread washing through her. Singing Hawk's face darkened. He would bring weapons to sacred ground? The question carried centuries of outrage. The sound of engines grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Voices echoed through the trees, men calling to one another, the metallic click of firearms being readied. We should withdraw, Alaric said to the elders, his tone respectful but firm. My security team can ensure your safety. Thomas Running Bear shook his head. This is sacred ground. We will not flee from it. Nor will I, Naya added, though her pulse raced with fear. Alaric assessed the situation quickly, his eyes scanning the natural features of the amphitheater. James, he commanded, position 3 men at the eastern approach. The rest should create a defensive line behind the largest stone formations. No one fires unless directly threatened. James nodded and disappeared to relay the orders. Your men should not shed blood here, Sarah cautioned Alaric. They won't unless absolutely necessary, he assured her. But neither will I allow harm to come to any of you, or to Naya. The elders exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. Then, to Naya's surprise, they moved to form a semicircle around her and Alaric, their backs to the Covenant Stone. We stand with the marked healer and the returned wolf, Singing Hawk declared, her frail body somehow projecting immense dignity. As was foretold. Alaric looked momentarily taken aback by their solidarity, but quickly recovered his composure. He positioned himself slightly ahead of the group, a king preparing to protect his people. Footsteps approached, and then Marcos appeared at the entrance to the amphitheater. He was not alone. Behind him came a dozen men, some from the reservation, others unfamiliar to Naya. Several carried rifles or handguns held casually, but visibly at their sides. But it was the man who stepped up beside Marcos that caused Alaric to tense. A tall, distinguished figure with silver-streaked dark hair and features that bore a striking resemblance to Alaric's own. "Hello, nephew," the man said, his accented voice carrying easily across the stone circle. "What an unexpected family reunion." Naya glanced at Alaric, whose face had turned to stone. "Victor," he responded, the single word laden with contained fury. Marcos stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Naya with a possessiveness that made her skin crawl. "You've hidden behind strangers long enough," he called to her. "It's time to come home." "She is home," Singing Hawk responded before Naya could speak. "Standing where she belongs, with her people and with the one foretold." Marcos sneered. "Old stories and superstitions. The council has been too weak for too long, clinging to myths while our people suffer in the modern world." He gestured to the armed men behind him. "We represent the future of the tribe. Strength, not subservience." "You represent nothing but your own ambition," Thomas countered, his voice steady despite the threat facing them. "You have brought weapons to sacred ground and allied yourself with an outsider against your own kind." Victor Westerlund smiled coldly. "Speaking of outsiders, my nephew appears to have developed quite an interest in local affairs." His gaze shifted to Naya, assessing her with calculated precision. "And local women." Alaric stepped forward, placing himself directly between Victor and the others. "You're a long way from Westerlund, uncle. Does the Regency Council know you've left your duties to chase me across continents?" "The Council answers to me now," Victor replied smoothly. "As for my duties, securing the rightful succession of the crown seems rather important, don't you think? Especially when the presumed heir has been consorting with tribal dissidents and rebels." Marcos moved closer to Victor, their unlikely alliance evident in their synchronized movements. "We both want what belongs to us," he said, his eyes never leaving Naya. "The woman, the crown, the future." The sun had begun its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the amphitheater. In that moment, standing between the elders and the two men who threatened everything she and Alaric held dear, Naya felt a strange calm settle over her. She stepped forward until she stood shoulder to shoulder with Alaric. "I belong to no one but myself," she declared, her voice ringing against the ancient stones. "And I stand with the rightful king." The silence that followed Naya's declaration seemed to hang suspended in the air, charged with the weight of ancient prophecies and present dangers. The setting sun painted the stone circle in shades of amber and blood red, casting long shadows across the weathered faces of all present. Victor's expression hardened, his aristocratic features twisting with contempt. "The rightful king?" he repeated, his accent sharpening with mockery. "My dear nephew abandoned his throne and his people. He fled in the night while his parents' bodies were still warm." Alaric's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Is that the story you've been telling, uncle? That I ran from duty rather than treachery?" His voice remained controlled, yet carried to every corner of the amphitheater. "How convenient that you omit the armed men you sent to my chambers that night, or the poison found in my food the week before." "Paranoid delusions," Victor dismissed with a wave of his manicured hand. "The tragic result of a young prince unable to bear the burden of succession." Marcos shifted impatiently beside Victor, his focus entirely on Naya. "Enough royal politics," he growled. "Naya, you've disgraced yourself and our traditions long enough. The tribal council may be weak, but there are those of us who still uphold the old ways." He gestured toward her markings. "Those symbols weren't given for you to parade among outsiders." "The old ways?" Thomas Running Bear's voice rose with indignation. You desecrated a sacred eagle, Marcos Redhawk. You've brought weapons to hallowed ground. Do not speak to us of traditions you defile with your actions. Marcos's face darkened. Times change, old man. Our people need strength, not ceremony. And what strength have you shown? Naya challenged, stepping forward despite Alaric's protective stance. Striking a woman who refused to be controlled, killing a sacred creature to make a point, allying with a man who betrayed his own family. She shook her head, a new confidence straightening her spine. That isn't strength. It's weakness disguised as power. A muscle jumped in Marcos's jaw. Behind him, several of his men exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation taking place on sacred ground. Victor, sensing the wavering resolve among Marcos's followers, stepped forward smoothly. This theatrical standoff accomplishes nothing, he said, his tone suddenly reasonable, diplomatic. Alaric, surely we can discuss succession matters privately as family. These tribal disputes are hardly our concern. You made them my concern when you allied with Marcos, Alaric replied evenly. Just as you made the military our concern when you secretly sold Westerland weapons to fund your coup, or our historical artifacts our concern when you began liquidating the royal collection to anonymous buyers. Victor's composed mask slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of surprise that Alaric possessed such specific knowledge of his activities. You've been busy these past 2 years, Alaric continued. As have I. The evidence of your crimes is already in the hands of the International Court and our allies in the European Union. Your position grows more precarious by the day. Singing Hawk moved forward, her frail form somehow commanding immediate attention. There is another matter more pressing than royal politics, she announced, her voice carrying surprising strength. The prophecy that brings us to this moment. She raised a gnarled hand toward the Covenant Stone. When your ancestor departed our lands, she said, addressing Alaric, but speaking loudly enough for all to hear, the shamans foretold that a time would come when the eagle and wolf would stand together against a great threat. That when the marked healer and the exiled king joined paths, both our peoples would face a crucial choice. The old woman turned toward Victor and Marcos. You two represent that threat, the corruption of power, the abandonment of sacred trusts in both your worlds. Victor's face twisted with disdain. Superstitious nonsense. But Naya noticed that several of Marcos's men had lowered their weapons slightly, their expressions troubled. Tribal prophecies still held power, even among those who claimed to embrace a more modern path. Not nonsense, Daniel Black Eagle countered, stepping forward to stand beside Singing Hawk. Truth carried through generations. As true as the bond sealed in blood when Alaric's ancestor married into our extended family, creating a connection between our peoples that transcends time and distance. As if summoned by his words, a gust of wind swept through the stone circle, causing the quartz veins in the surrounding stones to catch the last rays of the setting sun. For a breathtaking moment, the entire amphitheater seemed to glow from within, a phenomenon that caused even the armed men to murmur in surprise. The stones remember, Sarah Two Rivers whispered. Even when men forget. Alaric stood transfixed, his eyes moving from the glowing stones to the carved symbols of wolf and eagle. Naya could see him processing everything. The prophecy, his family's historical connection to her people, the convergence of past and present in this moment of confrontation. Then, with deliberate movements, he reached for his medallion, drawing it out from beneath his shirt. The royal symbol caught the light, seeming to pulse with the same energy that emanated from the stones around them. My father told me stories, he said, his voice quiet yet carrying to every ear. Tales of our family's origins that the official histories omitted. He spoke of an oath taken by my great-grandfather, a promise that our line would always honor the connection to this land and its people. His eyes met Naya's. I thought they were just bedtime stories meant to teach a child about heritage. They were truth, Robert Longbow affirmed, as is the prophecy that the return of the wolf would herald either a new beginning or the final ending of our ancient alliance. Marcos snorted derisively. And you believe this outsider is your prophesied savior, a European king with a convenient claim to indigenous heritage? We believe in the signs we have witnessed, Thomas replied steadily. The marked healer who fled violence to preserve ancient knowledge, the exiled king who returned to rediscover his true heritage, their paths crossing not by chance, but by design. Victor's patience visibly thinned. Enough of this primitive mysticism, he snapped. Alaric, you will return to Vesterlund to face charges of desertion and treason. As for the woman, he gestured dismissively toward Naya, she's no concern of mine. Marcos can deal with his tribal matters as he sees fit. She is my concern. Alaric's voice cut through the gathering dusk, steel beneath silk. As are the people of this land to whom my family swore allegiance generations ago. He moved to stand directly beside Naya, their shoulders nearly touching. The simple proximity felt to Naya like a declaration, a choice made visible. I came to these mountains seeking understanding of my past, Alaric continued. Instead, I've found something more valuable, a vision of the future. One where ancient bonds are honored, where power serves rather than corrupts. The light had faded enough that shadows now concealed the expressions of many present, but Naya could feel the shifting energy, the wavering loyalties among those who had followed Marcos to this confrontation. Pretty words from a man who abandoned his throne, Victor sneered, but words don't change reality. You're outnumbered and cornered, nephew. Your security team, impressive as they may be, cannot protect you, the woman, and these elders against our superior numbers. As if to emphasize his point, the remaining light glinted off weapons as Marcos's men and Victor's guards readied themselves for conflict. Numbers aren't everything, James's voice came from behind a large stone formation to their left. Alaric's security team had positioned themselves strategically around the amphitheater, their training evident in their discipline and stillness, until this moment. A tense silence fell as both sides assessed their positions. The sacred ground of whispering stones poised to become a battlefield despite centuries of peace. In that fraught moment, Naya felt a strange certainty settle over her. Without planning or premeditation, she reached for Alaric's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. The contact sent a jolt through her body, not just the natural electricity of skin against skin, but something deeper, as if some ancient current had found its completion. Alaric's eyes widened slightly as he felt it too. Their joined hands began to glow faintly, not with trick lighting or mystical energy, but with the reflected light of the Covenant stone, which had begun to emanate a soft luminescence as darkness fell completely around them. The stones remember, Singing Hawk repeated, wonder in her aged voice. They recognize the union of eagle and wolf. The soft glow emanating from the Covenant stone cast everyone's faces in ethereal light, transforming the standoff into something that felt ancient and inevitable. Alaric's hand remained firmly clasped with Naya's, their joined fingers illuminated by the strange luminescence that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their heartbeats. Victor was the first to break the spell, his aristocratic features contorting with impatience. Parlor tricks and primitive superstition, he spat, though Naya noticed the faintest tremor in his voice. This changes nothing. But it had changed something. Several of Marcos's followers had lowered their weapons entirely, their expressions a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Even among Victor's men, professional guards with no connection to tribal beliefs, there was visible hesitation. "This is sacred power," Thomas Running Bear declared, his voice resonating with quiet certainty. "The kind your bullets cannot touch, Marcos Redhawk." Marcos's face had drained of color, though whether from fear or rage, Naya couldn't tell. "You've bewitched them," he snarled at her, desperation edging into his tone. "Like you've bewitched this foreigner." He gestured sharply toward Alaric. "Our people need strength, not mysticism and surrender to outsiders." "Is that what you see here? Surrender?" Naya's voice rang clear in the night air, stronger than she'd ever heard it. "I see alliance. I see the fulfillment of promises made by ancestors who understood that division leads to destruction." Udul, the light from the covenant stone, intensified, illuminating the carved symbols of eagle and wolf with startling clarity. Shadows seemed to move across its surface, as if the stone itself were breathing. "Enough!" Victor barked, his composure fracturing. He pulled a sleek handgun from inside his jacket, aiming it directly at Alaric. "Family sentimentality has its limits, nephew. The throne of Westerlund is mine now, legitimized by 2 years of regency. Your death will simply formalize what everyone already accepts." The naked threat broke the uneasy stalemate. James and Alaric's security team shifted positions, weapons drawn but disciplined, awaiting their principal's command. Alaric remained unnervingly calm, his hand still joined with Naya's. "You've always lacked vision, Uncle," he said, his voice carrying easily despite its quietness. "You see only power to be seized, not responsibility to be shouldered. That's why you'll never be a true king, regardless of who sits on the throne." A muscle jumped in Victor's jaw. Pretty philosophy from a man about to die. He steadied his aim. What happened next occurred so swiftly that later, different witnesses would recall it differently. Marcos, perhaps sensing that his alliance with Victor was fracturing, or maybe driven by his obsession with reclaiming Naya, lunged forward with his hunting knife drawn. "She's mine to judge," he shouted, the blade glinting in the stone's light as he charged toward Naya. Several voices cried out in warning. Alaric moved to shield Naya. James raised his weapon. But before any could act, Singing Hawk stepped directly into Marcos's path, her frail body somehow immovable as granite, her aged hand raised in a gesture as old as the stones themselves. "You shall not bring violence to this sacred place," she commanded, her voice no longer that of a fragile elder, but resonant with the authority of generations. Marcos faltered, his momentum disrupted by surprise and ingrained respect. In that moment of hesitation, Daniel Black Eagle and Robert Longbow flanked Singing Hawk, creating a living barrier of elders. "Lower your weapons," Thomas called out, addressing all armed men present. "This ground has never known bloodshed in 1,000 years. It will not be defiled tonight." To Naya's amazement, many obeyed, both from Marcos's faction and Victor's security detail. Some primal recognition of authority beyond politics or personal loyalty seemed to ripple through the gathering. Only Victor remained unmoved, his gun still trained on Alaric. "Tribal superstitions don't apply to matters of state," he said coldly. "One bullet ends the Westerland succession crisis." "And confirms you as the murderer you are," Alaric replied evenly. "My death won't secure your throne, Uncle. It will only ensure that every allied nation knows exactly how you came to power, through the blood of your brother and his son." Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or the first seeds of doubt. Naya sensed his resolve wavering. In that critical moment, she released Alaric's hand and stepped forward, placing herself partially between uncle and nephew. The glow from the Covenant stone seemed to follow her movement, illuminating the traditional markings on her cheek. "You stand on ground where treaties have been made and kept for centuries," she said to Victor, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Where leaders of different tribes found paths to peace when war seemed inevitable. Your European politics have no authority here, but ancient law does." She gestured to the glowing stone. "And that law recognizes the bond between your family and mine." Victor's gun hand trembled almost imperceptibly. "What nonsense is this?" "Not nonsense," Singing Hawk interjected, moving to stand beside Naya. "Truth." She turned to address everyone present. "And when the first Westerlund came to our lands, he did not conquer. He married. His children carried both bloodlines. His grandson, who would become king across the ocean, swore an oath to honor that connection forever. An oath sealed in blood and stone," Daniel added, "and witnessed by the ancestors whose spirits reside in these rocks." As if in confirmation, a sudden wind gusted through the amphitheater, causing the quartz veins in the surrounding stones to capture and refract the moonlight that now bathed the scene. The effect was breathtaking, ribbons of silver light dancing across the ancient surfaces, creating an illusion of movement, of life within stone. Marcos, his aggression momentarily forgotten in the face of this phenomenon, took an involuntary step backward. Several of his followers did the same, murmuring among themselves. Victor, however, tightened his grip on his weapon, desperation hardening his features. "I didn't come this far to be deterred by convenient weather and primitive legends," he hissed. Alaric moved to stand beside Naya, his shoulder brushing against hers in a gesture of unity. "No, you came this far because you're losing ground in Westerlund," he said. "The Regency Council is fracturing. The evidence of your crimes is circulating among our allies. Even those who supported you are beginning to question your legitimacy." Victor's expression confirmed the truth of these words, his composure cracking further. "You're not just fighting me, Uncle," Alaric continued. "You're fighting history itself. The history that connects my bloodline to this place and these people. A connection you tried to erase from our family records, but couldn't destroy." The standoff had reached its breaking point. Victor's finger tensed on the trigger. Naya could feel the elders gathering closer, their presence a living shield of dignity and tradition. Alaric's security team had positioned themselves strategically, ready to respond to any threat. It was in this moment of perfect tension that Naya felt a profound shift within herself, the final shedding of fear, the full embrace of who she was and what she represented. She reached again for Alaric's hand, and as their fingers intertwined, she began to sing. The song was ancient, a healing melody taught to her by her grandmother, passed down through generations of women in her tribe. Its notes spiraled into the night air, pure and unwavering, echoing against the stone circle until it seemed that the very rocks were singing with her. One by one, the elders joined their voices to hers, the harmonies complex and haunting. Even those who had come with Marcos, men who claimed to reject the old ways, found themselves lowering their weapons completely, transfixed by the power of the ritual unfolding before them. Victor alone remained unmoved, his gun still aimed at Alaric's heart. But now he stood isolated, a solitary figure of defiance against the unified presence of those who had chosen a different path. "It's over, Uncle," Alaric said softly as the song reached its crescendo. "Not just here, but in Westerlund too. Choose how this ends." For a long, breathless moment, Victor's fate hung in the balance, written in the tension of his trigger finger and the wild calculation in his eyes. Then, with a sound somewhere between a curse and a sob, he lowered his weapon. "You've won nothing," he said bitterly. "A circle of rocks and tribal chanting won't restore your throne." "Perhaps not," Alaric acknowledged. "But truth and justice will, and they begin here, tonight, with your surrender." As if responding to some unspoken command, James and two other security team members moved forward, disarming Victor with professional efficiency. The former regent of Westerlund offered no resistance, his fight evaporating as quickly as the threat he had posed. With Victor neutralized, all eyes turned to Marcos, who stood rigid with fury and disbelief, watching as his followers distanced themselves from him, both physically and symbolically. "You would choose superstition over strength?" he demanded of them, his voice cracking with rage. One of the men, an elder hunter from the reservation whom Naya had known since childhood, stepped forward. "We choose harmony over hatred," he said simply, "as our ancestors did before us." Marcus's hand tightened around his hunting knife, his knuckles white with strain. For a terrible moment, Naya thought he might launch himself at her or Alaric in one final desperate attack. Instead, with a guttural cry of frustration, he hurled the knife to the ground and turned to stalk away into the darkness beyond the stone circle. "Let him go," Singing Hawk advised as James moved to pursue. "He carries his own punishment within him now." The confrontation had ended not with violence, but with the quiet power of unity and tradition, exactly as the sacred ground of Whispering Stones had witnessed for centuries before. As the tension dissipated, the glow from the Covenant Stone gradually dimmed, returning to its natural state. But something had changed irrevocably in that circle of ancient rock. Not just for Westerland's exiled king and the Apache healer who stood beside him, but for all who had witnessed the fulfillment of a prophecy generations in the making. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in watercolor strokes of rose and gold. In Naya's cabin, the morning light filtered through the windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floor where she sat cross-legged, grinding herbs with a stone mortar. The familiar motion centered her, a ritual unchanged despite how profoundly her world had transformed in the past week. Outside, voices murmured as Alaric's security team prepared for departure. Victor had been taken into custody, transported to Geneva, where international authorities awaited with questions about weapons deals and financial crimes. The evidence Alaric had gathered during his 2 years of exile had proven more than sufficient to begin dismantling his uncle's power structure. A soft knock interrupted Naya's thoughts. She looked up to see Alaric standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. Gone was the hooded stranger from the market. In his place stood a man fully inhabiting his identity, neither just a king nor just a man, but the complex intersection of both. "The plane leaves in 2 hours, he said, his voice gentle with unspoken questions. Naya set aside her mortar and rose to her feet. "Then we shouldn't delay," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Since that night at Whispering Stones, they had moved in a delicate dance of proximity and distance, both aware of the connection that had sparked between them, yet cautious of its implications. The prophecy, the glowing stone, their joined hands. These were powerful symbols, but real life required more than symbols. "The elders have asked to speak with you before we leave," Alaric told her, stepping into the cabin. "They're waiting at the clearing." Together, they walked through the forest path that now felt like a bridge between chapters of her life. The morning air carried the scent of pine and possibility, and Naya breathed it deeply, memorizing this moment of transition. In the clearing, the tribal elders had gathered in a semicircle, their faces solemn yet peaceful. Singing Hawk stepped forward as they approached, her aged hands extended in greeting. "The marked healer returns to her people," she said, taking Naya's hands in her own. "Not as one who fled, but as one who completed a sacred journey." Thomas Running Bear nodded in agreement. "The council recognizes that your departure was necessary, not abandonment, but preservation of something precious. Your healing knowledge," Sarah Two Rivers added, "and your spirit, which would have been broken had you remained." Naya felt tears welling in her eyes, the formal absolution healing wounds deeper than she had realized. "Thank you," she whispered. Singing Hawk turned to Alaric. "And you, wolf who walks with eagles, you return to your distant throne carrying part of us with you." Alaric inclined his head respectfully. "I carry the responsibility of our shared history," he acknowledged, "and the promise of our connected future." Daniel Black Eagle stepped forward, holding a small leather pouch. "For generations, this has been kept in trust," he said, presenting it to Alaric. "A token of the covenant, meant to be returned when the prophecy was fulfilled." Alaric accepted the pouch with reverence. Opening it, he withdrew a small object that glinted in the morning light, half of a medallion, identical in design to the one he wore, but older, its surface worn by centuries. "My father spoke of this," he said, voice thick with emotion. "The original medallion split in two when my ancestor departed. One half remained with your people as a pledge of his return." Singing Hawk nodded. "Or the return of his blood in a time of need." Alaric carefully joined the two halves, which fit together perfectly despite the passage of time. The completed medallion seemed to catch the light with unusual brilliance, as if awakened after a long sleep. "The circle is complete," Robert Longbow declared, "as is your journey, Naya Whitefeather." Naya looked at the elders, then at Alaric, understanding flowing between them without words. "Not complete," she corrected gently. "Transformed." They returned to the cabin to collect her few belongings. As Naya packed her medicines and the photograph of her parents, she felt not the wrench of departure, but the expansion of possibility. "Are you certain?" Alaric asked, watching her from the doorway. "Westerlund is far from everything you know." Naya touched the markings on her cheek, the symbol of her heritage that she would carry always. "Not everything," she replied. "My healing knowledge comes with me. My connection to the ancestors remains unbroken." She met his eyes. "And I'll have you." The simple declaration hung between them, neither question nor demand, but acknowledgement of the bond that had formed in fire and prophecy, then deepened through choice and respect. Alaric crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her hands in his. "I came to these mountains seeking my past," he said, his voice low with emotion. "I never expected to find my future." "Nor I," Naya whispered. Their first kiss was gentle, a meeting of equals, a promise sealed not by prophecy, but by the quiet certainty of 2 hearts recognizing their counterpart. Outside, the morning had blossomed into full daylight. Mrs. Littlefeather waited on the porch, her roomy eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "So the eagle flies with the wolf," she said as they emerged from the cabin. "Just as the ancestors foretold." Naya embraced the old woman. "I'll return," she promised, "with knowledge from across the ocean to share with our people." "Of course you will," Mrs. Littlefeather replied with serene confidence. "The circle never breaks, child. It only grows wider." As they drove away from Pinewood, Naya watched the mountains recede through the window, the mist clinging to their peaks like memories. Beside her, Alaric held the reunited medallion, its surface catching the sunlight. "In Westerlund, there's a saying," he told her, his voice quiet with reverence. "The crown carries the past, but the heart carries the future." Naya smiled, placing her hand over his. "In my tradition, we say that healing comes not from forgetting wounds, but from transforming them into wisdom." Together they had transformed their wounds, his exile, her flight, into something new and hopeful, not escaping the past, but building upon it, not abandoning heritage, but honoring it through growth. As the plane lifted into the clear Montana sky, carrying them toward a shared future neither could have imagined, Naya thought of that desperate moment in the market when she had thrown herself into a stranger's arms, whispering, "Please pretend you know me." The universe, it seemed, had answered with profound irony, for in that moment of desperate pretense, she had found the one person who truly would come to know her, heart, spirit, and soul, across boundaries of culture and continent, beyond the constraints of crown and custom, not pretense but truth, not escape but homecoming, not an ending, but a beginning written in stone and starlight, blood and bone, eagle and wolf united at last.